Hello, I'm Lucinda Jolly, a South African arts writer and educator. This podcast is an invitation to discover how certain historical paintings, in this case, Gericault's Raft of the Medusa, are reimagined, reworked, parodied, played with, reiterated. It's suitable for art enthusiasts, for art educators and students. The information for this podcast is adapted from my work first published in the Daily Maverick Life section, and it was titled The Many Extraordinary Iterations of the Raft of the Medusa. And I'm going to begin this podcast with a quote by the historian Jules Michelet, who was actually a contemporary of the 19th century Romanticist artist Théodore Gericault, who was the painter of the Raft of the Medusa. And the quote that I'm going to read to you actually is a criticism against the French monarchy. And it's this quote that sets the tone for this piece of writing. Michelet wrote, "We are all on the raft of the Medusa." And it's a wonderful quote to open and start unpacking why certain historical paintings capture the imagination of famous contemporary artists, from Frank Stella to Banksy. Paintings like Gericault's The Raft of the Medusa, Goya's The 3rd of May, and Picasso's Guernica. And how, with a tweak here and a twist there, from the sublime to the ridiculous, these paintings become as relevant to our present as they were to our past. And there are no figures indicating how many visit the Museo Nacional del Prado in Madrid to see Goya's 3rd of May. With The Raft of the Medusa, it attracted 40,000 viewers in its day. And then for 19 years, Guernica traveled the world. Modern iterations use a variety of mediums, including the chocolate drizzles of Vic Munitz, a driftwood reiteration by Marc Boulier, the vegetable iteration by Jules Michelet, the tableau vivant of Adna Hanna, and the photographs of the anonymous artists that make up the Bruce High Quality Foundation, which actually is a reference to a deceased fictional artist named Bruce. So those are just some of the modern iterations or remakings of the Raft of the Medusa. But why certain paintings are chosen as opposed to others to be reconstituted by them surely lies in the fact that these play out the ongoing drama of human nature, and so remain pertinent even in current times. Dare I say, they have a universality. And could these iterations, reconstitutions, or remakings of these famous historical paintings also be regarded as subsections of memes, that ancient Greek-sounding term which is defined as a self-replicating chunk of information, which, surprise, surprise, is found on the internet, but didn't begin with the internet. In fact, some say that memes have been used for centuries. Evolutionary biologist and author Richard Dawkins is given credit for introducing the term in the late 70s in his book, The Selfish Gene. According to Saint Hoax, meme creator extraordinaire, a meme has the ability to capture insight in a way that is in complete alignment with the zeitgeist of the time. Its power lies in its transmissibility and unique knack of being cross-cultural. A little bit of background on the meme. As academic and author Simon Sharma so aptly writes, if we want to sense the terror inflicted by bombing on civilians with unparalleled immediacy, we look at Picasso's Guernica. If we feel the need to look at the unwatchable, say a firing squad emptying their rifles on a civilian, we find our way to Goya's 3rd of May. And if we want to see corruption, gross incompetence, fear of political reprisals, and the total disregard for ordinary human life, we look no further than the Raft of the Medusa. 200 years later, we are still psychically adrift on that Raft of the Medusa. It's a quote that provides insight as to why a young South African art student, Simpiwe Nzube, was inspired by Gericault's painting, The Raft of the Medusa, to create his own sculpture titled Raft, which was exhibited at the National Gallery, Iziko, in 2015. Especially considering the Raft of the Medusa painting was executed 200 years ago in a country almost 9,000 kilometers away and at a considerable cultural distance. So Simpiwe made his assemblage from everyday utilities. His raft is a deliberate, precarious-looking construction. It's made up of rough wooden pallets on which, stuffed to bursting, are bundles of cloth. The pallet itself rests on black refuse bins, and these are tipped on their sides. And then there's a disembodied black man's arm emerging from the cloth bundles, clutching a sun umbrella. So you can picture that, these wooden pallets, these refuse bins on which the pallets are, and these bundles of cloth, and then this arm, this disembodied black man's arm emerging from the cloth, holding a sun umbrella. Raft references the black man at the apex of the painting by Gericault, The Raft of the Medusa. And he, in the painting, is waving a red cloth in the hope of attracting a rescue ship. Simpiwe's raft may be a far cry from Gericault's haunting historical oil painting, but it's no less powerful. Both works embody a metaphorical and literal cry for rescue. There are many parallels between Gericault's work, The Raft of the Medusa, with Simpiwe's raft. In an interview with Perspectives, Simpiwe explained that his departure for raft was about spaces, those in the South African township, and in particular his own coastal township, Masiphumelela, near Kommetjie. He posited the idea of a township as a sinking raft. It's one that operates both geographically and psychically. Masiphumelela is situated in a valley, so it gives the impression of a sinking raft. And like Gericault's raft, which was severed from the lifeboats, the townships are dislocated places, in Simpiwe's interpretation. A further parallel is with the violence that erupted on the Raft of the Medusa, and that violence which is also systemic to township living. And it was created in 2015, Simpiwe's raft, against a background of the global migrant crisis. The story of the Raft of the Medusa, originally titled Scenes from a Shipwreck, is to be so that it was renamed to be so that it was less politically provocative, is a very bleak one. And it's more about human suffering than a political statement. It's one that touches on the old age themes of societal inequalities, the fiscally and status privileged, power, incompetence and negligence of those in positions of power, the fear of reprisal and the total disregard for human life. The painting is also indicative of a psychic shift in the narrative of the times, for in Gericault's narrative, The Raft of the Medusa, in a way as in Simpiwe, there are no heroes, just survivors and victims. Gericault could have depicted any one of the many highlights of this epic drama, but instead he chooses to paint a moment of polarity, extreme hope in the shape of the Argus ship, which is a mere speck on the horizon, being waved at by a desperate man, a black man, and the use of a black man suggests the artist's abolitionist sympathies, abolition of slavery, and of course the extreme despair as the ship just carried on. The Raft of the Medusa is the story of an aristocratic captain who was appointed by the French king to captain a French frigate, or another word for a medium-sized warship called the Medusa, carrying 400 souls, including the French governor of Senegal, and they were making their way to Senegal. The captain was inexperienced, he hadn't been to sea for 20 years, and he wanted to make good time, but it came at an enormous price. The craft ran aground on the West African coast. There weren't enough lifeboats. That meant that 147 remaining low-ranking passengers had to jump onto a life raft, which was roped to the boat. So what became a metaphor of injustice was the captain's decision to cut the rope between the lifeboat and the boat, setting it adrift for 13 days on rough seas, during which cannibalism, murder, and insanity prevailed. This dark side of human nature was really at strong odds with Rousseau's prevailing philosophy of the human nature being essentially good. And then only 15 of the 147 survived. So you can imagine the despair of being run aground. Then there are not enough lifeboats. Then the ship's carpenter makes this raft. It's tied to the main lifeboat, and then somebody cuts it, so you're adrift at sea. In preparation for the painting, Gericault, who was 27 years at the time, cut his hair like a supplicant on a spiritual path. It's like he was a precursor to Stanislavski's method acting. And he actually turned his studio into a body farm with corpses from morgues and asylums. He interviewed shipwreck survivors. He watched dissections. He studied stormy skies and seas. And he actually constructed a detailed model of the raft, so he could really get a sense of the experience bodily, viscerally. And interesting, the edge of the raft in the painting is pitched at such a way that when you, the viewer, look at it, it's like you're just a step away from entering the nightmare, from stepping aboard the raft. 4 years later, Gericault was dead. In response to the H1N pandemic in 2009, the artist Adnan Hanna photographed a version of the Raft of the Medusa in which he dressed participants in hazmat type suits, those hazard suits, those white suits. And these images were archived after the H1N1 pandemic receded. But then Hanna revisited them in 2020, right in the middle of the global COVID-19 pandemic, and he saw Gericault's raft as a rudderless vessel cut loose by those in charge and left to drift aimlessly, and once again a potent symbol of inept leadership and the human toll it takes. In 2015, he was invited to Senegal to produce a work commemorating the 200th anniversary of the shipwreck, because remember, the Raft of the Medusa was on the way to Senegal when it got shipwrecked. In response, Hanna produced a series of tableaux vivants. A tableau vivant is, the using people to actually stage a painting or to become a painting that real life, and then people would walk past and look. He used pieces of dismantled pirogue boats and acres of blue cloth in which only Senegalese nationals featured as models, in complete contrast to the primary white crew in the original painting. So there's his reiteration, his remaking, his comment on political issues and concerns and social issues. Hanna explains that his tableau vivant was a blend of the historical and the contemporary, and his approach to retextualizing the events on the raft. But instead of using just a change of location, he uses a time-related shift of 200 years. And in so doing, he draws attention to both the original tragedy of gross corruption and the incompetence, and its many parallels with contemporary society and contemporary events. In the same year, 2015, the street artist and political activist Banksy also produced his own monochromatic stencil interpretation of the Raft of the Medusa, and he titles this "Refugees Waving to a Luxury Yacht." And this was created from Banksy's time at the refugee camp in Calais. It's painted on a wall, which is a stone's throw away from the Calais immigration office. And the tiny, almost imperceptible rescue ship that is the Argus in the original painting was replaced by a modern luxury sea craft, and it just sails by, ignoring the shipwrecked survivors who were waving desperately for help. The image was accompanied by the text, "We are not all in the same boat." Refugees Waving to a Luxury Yacht criticizes both Britain and France's lack of support for the refugees, and refers to the notorious jungle refugee camp in Calais that housed thousands of refugees hoping to get to Britain. 2 years later, the owner of the wall, finding the wall too shabby, actually painted over the stencil. So that's like, well, a couple of euros, definitely a couple of thousand of euros lost there. Chinese artist Jules Jemmings, The Raft of the Medusa, draws a parallel to the suffering of millions of Chinese intellectuals during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Whose raft is constructed from soft drink bottles and littered with film cartons and fast food packets, the garbage of consumer culture. And in the center of his raft, he depicts a European-style painting studio. The artist is with his nude model and is surrounded by a chaotic mass of groups of contemporary Chinese teenagers and revolutionary forefathers. So there's an Eastern or Asian interpretation. The reproduction of the Raft of the Medusa is one of the paintings included in Jeff Koons's 25 gazing ball paintings done in 2015. And here each painting in this grouping has a blue glass gazing ball. It's like on a little shelf on the painting itself, and this would be reproductions because he wouldn't have repainted it. So reproduction of the Raft of the Medusa. And then the viewer looks into this little ball and sees their own reflection. And it's as if they've entered the painting via this reflection. So it's inclusive. You are part of the painting. This experience, says Koons, is about you, your desires, your interests, your participation, your relationship with the image. So it draws your consciousness. It makes you conscious of the fact that you are viewing this painting. Peter Saul's painting, Last Moments on the Raft of the Medusa, also 2015, is a combination of sharp, dark humor and social commentary, and it shows one figure swallowing pink intestines while feeding a raft mate to the sharks. And he says he was inspired to do this by the many wild anecdotes surrounding the original Raft of the Medusa by Théodore Gericault. Then in 2019, Pascal Boyart, or P-Boy, created a mural on the wall of the roof of the former gold foundry of the Banque de France. In P-Boy's interpretation, the raft's sail is made of US dollars, and his contemporary figures lie next to a smashed iPhone and a bottle of spilt prescription pills. I guess it's a reference to our society. As Simon Sharma, the academic, aptly writes, for both artists, the pathos and cruelty of abandonment functions as a commentary on the injustices, inequalities of their times. There's a damning continuity between indifference to the plight of those fleeing destitution and war, and the moral squalor of a glamorous art world awash with money. As Colombian-born artist Doris Salcedo writes, art doesn't rescue. What art can do is create an emotional connection that communicates the victim's experience. It's as if the victim's destroyed life, cut short at the time of the murder, might or could in some way continue within the spectator's experience. And genius is not about predicting the future, but being able to convey the zeitgeist of the present with such acuteness that it takes our breath away. Taken one step further, it's the ability of the painter to still move us hundreds of years down the line, so that we pay homage to whether it's in a flippant or serious way by responding with an interpretation of the original.